Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Olympus educator and wedding and portrait photographer Joe Ellis, and today is our second episode of Cup of Joe, some ideas I have for future firmware updates for your Olympus camera. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, this is kind of a three-part deal here. First thing happened last night. I was just checking my email and I found I had a package that had arrived in my studio from Olympus. And so first thought I had was sort of the wild idea that maybe they sent me a EM5 Mark III early for some pre-production videos. And I know that that was a huge long shot because there's not very many of them in the country, but I did get my hopes up momentarily. When I got down there in the morning, I found that they actually sent me a really cool piece of swag. This Olympus tote for the EM5 Mark III, believe it or not. And I was riding home with this in the seat next to me. I was thinking, you know what? This is a lightweight tote. It's, the perfect size. It's the same quality as much larger totes. It's everything you would want to carry with nothing extra. And it's a very handsome everyday carry. So congratulations to Olympus on the consistency of their messaging here. Their tote bags match their camera bodies. So with that aside, I am looking forward to getting the camera and putting it through its real-world paces, doing a setup video on it, and all that kind of good stuff. So look forward to that coming up in the coming weeks. Now, we did a video on the launch of the EM5 last week, and I have gotten a ton of emails and DMs and things asking questions about the new camera and this, that, and the other. And I did want to recap a couple of things that have just come up over the last few days. And hopefully, if you look through the notes of this video, you'll find that there's some good information there in terms of the differences between what I think is the most relevant comparison, which is the EM1 Mark II versus the EM5 Mark III. Since both cameras are within, $300 of each other, I think most people who are shopping for an Olympus camera in that price range are going to look at both models. So just really quickly, and again, you can find this in the notes, the EM1, the pros that it has in terms of features and things that the EM5 Mark III does not have would be number one, the bigger battery, the dual card slots. I think for a lot of people, ergonomics. So the size of the camera in terms of being a little bit larger, larger grip, that kind of thing. The buttons are a little bit more spaced out, that kind of deal. Might be a benefit to some. And obviously, if you have smaller hands or prefer smaller cameras, that would be the exact opposite for you. Faster sequential shooting. So one small nuance there is that Pro Capture in the EM1 Mark II is 60 frames per second, for example, and in the EM5 Mark III it's 30 frames per second. It has a headphone jack, it has the all-metal construction, the LCD EVF, so the screen that makes the electronic viewfinder, is 120 frames per second versus 60 frames per second in the EM5 Mark III. Although the EM5 Mark III is an OLED viewfinder and the LCD screen in the EM1X and the EM1 Mark II is not as vibrant or as rich in terms of blacks and things like that. So that's more of a trade-off, but the EM1X and EM1 Mark II are 120 and the EM5 Mark III is 60 frames per second. The EM1 Mark II has the optional vertical grip that has the extra battery and the vertical shooting orientation trigger button. That is not going to be available on the EM5 Mark III. You can get an extra handle, which will increase the depth of the grip and give you an extra trigger button, but it's not the vertical orientation type, and there's no extra battery there. And then the last thing that I've heard there's a difference there is that the EM1 Mark II has both the OM log profile for video and the flat picture profile, whereas the EM5 Mark III has just the flat picture profile. But for me, and for what it's worth, I've actually been preferring the flat picture profile because it's easier for me to grade and things like that most of the time, especially when I'm just out doing, projects in pretty good light or I'm in a studio situation. The flat picture profile winds up working awesome for me. Now, in terms of the EM5 Mark III, it has 120 frames per second slow motion video, which the EM1 Mark II does not. And of course, that just allows you to get that extra smooth slow motion for B-roll, things like that. So that's a definite benefit. It has USB charging, so if you're in a car and you're on a road trip and you can charge with a power bank, or you're going to be gone for a long period of time, that's another option for you to keep yourself charged up. It has a smaller size and weight. So, obviously, it is a smaller camera body. It is, I'm telling you guys right now, it's a pocketable size camera. If you put one of the f1.8 primes on, like the 17, 25, or 45, and you're doing street photography, or you're just trying to have a camera with you all the time, that extra size and weight reduction that comes with the EM5 Mark III and using those small prime lenses is a huge benefit. If you're going to put on the pro grade zooms like the 40 to 150, the 12 to 40, the 12 to 100, I think that reduction in size and weight is largely lost. So think about that as you're planning what your lens lineup is going to be and what you're willing to carry. If you were willing to carry those larger pro zooms or the pro primes like the 1.2 primes, then maybe the EM1 Mark II makes a better fit for you than the EM5 Mark III. And then, of course, it has Bluetooth. And one thing I heard online was someone was hoping that the Bluetooth was going to be audio so that you could use it to monitor video with headphones. But to my knowledge, the Bluetooth on the EM1X and the EM5 Mark III is mainly there to be able to transfer photographs between the camera and your cell phone while you're not monitoring that. So you could have it transferring the entire time during a shoot, and then when you're finished, those photos would already be there without having to wait for transfer and things like that. It's not a feature that I've actually used very much, and so if you have notes on that in the comments on YouTube, I'd love to hear how that's going for you and what you guys think of that feature. And then last of all is cost. So you are talking about a $300 difference, so that is definitely something worth considering as you plan out your camera lineup. So those are the basic differences, and again, I'm going to have that in the description just for reference. If you have questions about that and you want to talk about it in the comments, just hit me up. So the third part of this is actually the main part of this video, and why I kind of wanted to do this Cup of Joe. I thought it'd be fun for us to bat around a few ideas for firmware upgrades for our Olympus cameras. I'll be sure to pass this along to anybody that I know at Olympus, and maybe we'll see some of this stuff show up in future updates. I want to go over kind of my top 5 things that I would like to see, and I love to kind of hear what you guys feel would be most important to your photography. So the first thing is I like the warning in the EVF and on the screen on the back of the camera for live view boost, because there isn't one right now. I'd like a warning to be there for that. And I like the warning for S-OVF to be bigger and less and more noticeable when you're using it. So the story is this: if you're shooting a lot in dark environments and you need to use live view boost or S-OVF, and those are both two modes that exist to decouple the camera from showing you the exposure preview because you're using a flash. So in a dark situation, what I want the viewfinder to be artificially brighter than the exposure I've set because I'm using a strobe to make up the additional light that I need. And so because it can't preview strobe in any way, I need it to be decoupled. Live View Boost will do that for both the EVF and the rear screen. S-OVF does it for just the EVF. S-OVF does automatic brightness, automatic white balance, automatic color, all those things. And so if you hit that button, and you can assign it to a button on top of the camera, you can immediately go into that mode. And there is a tiny little icon that shows up on the screen to tell you that you're in that mode. Live View Boost, on the other hand, will retain your picture profile and your white balance and things like that, and it does artificially boost the picture's brightness for you on both the screen and the EVF. But there's no indication anywhere in the viewfinder that you're in Live View Boost mode. And the reason that that's important to me is that if I'm moving from, let's say, the inside of a church to outside in broad daylight, if I'm not being hyper aware of the fact that I have that mode turned on, then when I go outside, I will see a picture that appears to be well exposed, but might be over or underexposed 2 or 3 or more stops. So while I've learned to become hyper aware of that, it would be really great if the screen and the EVF gave us a really strong indication, strong feedback that we are in that mode. So that's my number 1. The next one is also related to flash, and that is that I would really like the integration between the flashes like the FL700WR and the camera body to be a lot tighter. I'd really like to be able to assign custom buttons on the camera body to do things like temporarily disable the flash, or to do flash exposure compensation, or to deal with the groups and mastering of remote flashes. I think that would be a really nice thing to have, considering that it's all from the same manufacturer, and so you should be able to use the rear screen to get that job done. And right now there is some integration, but it is also not exactly tied in really well. Like for example, if you want to do flash exposure compensation and you want to use the body, that's not reflected on the screen on the back of the flash. The flash has its own exposure compensation, and then the camera has its own flash exposure compensation. And the two of them are not working together to show you the same value at the same time. Okay. The next one, the last one revolving around flash, is that I would really like to be able to have the camera kick into S-OVF or live view boost as soon as the flash is turned on and go away as soon as the flash is turned off. And that would be a nice sort of safety measure there too. So if I was moving from one environment to the other and I was going from inside to outside, for example, and I wanted to go ahead and have turn the flash off as I was moving outside, then my camera would like automatically default to my outdoor settings. So I think that would be a really easy one to implement as well. Okay, and then the last two are easy. The one is the one that I've been hearing forever, and I'm sure we'll hear it again in the comments. This is my best guess, is that I would like the camera to have a menu setting that says that you cannot shoot a picture unless there is media inside the camera, unless there is an SD card inside the camera. I think it'd be really simple to implement this feature, and I have to say that I've heard plenty of horror stories, and even over my long career, there have been times when I've lost 2 or 3 pictures before I've gone to review them and noticed that I didn't have a camera a card in the camera. So I would love that feature to be there. I think it'd be a super easy one to add in, so hopefully if they hear it enough times, they'll give that to us. And then the last one, my 5th one, is that I would really like the artificial intelligence and the EM1X, for example, to move into the people space. I'd like to see all the engineering and ingenuity that Olympus can give us, with planes, trains, and automobiles moved over to people and eyes and portraits and being able to track things that way. Face detect and eye detect are improving, I think, throughout the different models and generations, but right now it's still not reliable enough to use in a live event where you only have one chance to get things done. I can't use face detect to track a bride and groom walking back up the aisle after they've gotten married in a relatively low light environment. The camera does just fine in continuous autofocus tracking or continuous autofocus without tracking, where I'm just placing an autofocus point on them and holding down the AF on button. It'll track them walking back just fine. But I'd really like to be able to just tap their faces when they're on the altar and just have it continue to focus on them the entire time as they're walking back. I think that would be tremendous, and then that's the next phase of where I think the autofocus system, the autofocus world is going. And I'd love to see Olympus be at the forefront of that whole thing. And then my bonus one would be, I would love it if possible, if they could add 4K 60 video to the EM1X. It has so much horsepower, having the dual processors and the dual batteries and all that. I was hoping maybe they'd be able to add that in. So those are my top 5. What are yours, guys? Hit me up in the comments and let's discuss. Let's try and keep it to topics that are, focused around firmware and not really hardware or physical changes to the camera body. I like it to be ones that would be like really smart, simple additions to menus or functionality for existing cameras. That would be really cool. Okay, so the last thing I have for you guys today is kind of a hot tip. It was one of my firmware update wish list things that I was able to actually solve using the camera's current technology. And that is that the default state of your autofocus points when you get the camera out of the box is for the brackets that are the autofocus point to be kind of a gray color. So if you were to place them in a dark part of your frame or to put them over something gray, like the wall behind me, then those autofocus points tended to get really lost in the process. And if I'm working a wedding reception or in a dark environment, I oftentimes, if I'm not actively moving the autofocus point, have a hard time finding where it is in the frame. And so I found a fix for this. If you go into an EM1 Mark II or an EM1X and you go to menu D3, and then you go, let me just make sure I got this right. You go to D3, you go to grid settings, you go to display color, and then you can set one of 2 presets. And when you go into those presets, you'll see that there's values for R, G, and B, and alpha. And so by using red, green, blue, and the alpha channel, which is the brightness, you can set the autofocus point, its resting state, to any color that you want. And you can have that with or without the grid. So for example, I'm actually testing out the idea of making them white. And that way they stand out to me against any kind of dark background. And I find that really helpful in the sense that if, let's say I'm shooting a picture over my head and I'm not quite sure where my autofocus point is, then I know that I can move it right onto them before I hit the focus button. So if you guys have been struggling with that at all, that's my little fix for that. You go in and look for your grid settings, and then you can change the color of your resting autofocus points. You can also change the color of the grid on the screen if you want it to be white or red or blue or pink or orange. You can make it that way to suit whatever it is, contrasting to whatever it is that you shoot. So that's what I've got today, guys. Please hit me up with comments. Let's discuss it. And if you guys have questions about the EM5 Mark III, I'm going to have one soon, hopefully, and we'll be putting it through its paces and doing a setup video and all that kind of good stuff. But I do know a lot about the camera and its specs, so I'm happy to answer questions. And then if you have a minute, give me your top 2, 3, 4, or 5 firmware update suggestions, and we'll pass them along to Olympus, and maybe one day we'll see them in the next update. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one.